Okay, everyone, thanks for coming, and we're going to get started here. So, thank you for coming, and yes, I just hit it. So, yes, thank you, Mark. And this is being recorded, so you'll get a chance. We'll download it and put it on our YouTube page. So if you've got friends or family, I know there were some people that specifically requested this because they weren't going to be here. So rest assured that it is being recorded. So we'll give you guys all a chance to ask your own questions too after I get through my list. So, but let's kind of just begin in prayer. Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Matthew chapter 10, verse 29 to 31. Jesus, you spoke those words as you were sending out the disciples two by two, in which you warned them that you were sending them like sheep among the wolves. But you reassured them that you would be by their side, that if you care for the sparrows, you indeed care for them. Today we reflect on the life of one of your disciples who, along with her family, trusted that you would protect them as they left everything behind to start a new life in a new country. You, in fact, did protect them, beginning with that harrowing journey on a boat that would ultimately lead them to the United States and for Dr. Katrina Nguyen here in Rockford. We Americans who were born and raised here sometimes take for granted the abundance and security to which we've been born into. Give us lives of gratitude as we learn about the Dr. Katrina Nguyen story. May we always appreciate all you have bestowed on us, and may you continue to guide Katrina and all of us as we continue to make our journey that ultimately leads to you. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, all right. So this I should just mention, just brief background on the kind of the brand of one from the Pews, and that really comes from me. A lot of it is just sitting in the back of the church or standing there as I'm talking to you as you're coming to say hello and chatting over a cup of coffee, and I'm hearing these stories, and I'm like, wow, this is an amazing story, and almost nobody knows this story, that our parishioner, we have a parishioner who's a miracle hunter, and he's the most recognized in the world. He's got an EWTN show, and nobody knows who this man is, except for me. And so, that was one of them, if you remember Michael O'Neill. And we had the kickboxing champion. That kind of led things off, so he was the boxing man of the year in ESPN. Okay, it was back in 1984, but it still was quite noteworthy. And some people kind of knew his story, but most people didn't. So we had a series of those. And not many of us have a compelling life story such that we actually write an autobiography. But Dr. Katrina Nguyen has, in fact, done that. And so you can get your copy on Amazon, but we happen to have copies right in the back. So for $20, cash or a check, you can get your copy, and actually $10 of that will be donated to our youth ministry. So we thank you for that donation. So with that, so it's really just to kind of help flesh out someone's story that is quite remarkable and is worth sharing with the rest of the parishioners. So if you know of other people also that maybe have a particularly compelling life story that you think is a parishioner of ours, let me know. Eventually, when he retires, I'm sure I'll be interviewing Dean Lowry, so he's on that list. But I don't really have anyone else in mind. It's just as things kind of come up, and as people share ideas with me that I then do these things. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to ask a bunch of questions to Dr. Nguyen, and we'll get started with the very first one is, and I want to ask you to talk about your journey to the U.S., which began 8 days before the fall of Saigon in 1975, beginning with that treacherous boat ride. I should say that, when I was thinking about the fall of Saigon, the iconic image I always think about is the American embassy, and we're basically fleeing for our lives. And you see all these Americans on the roof of the embassy, and they're hopping on that helicopter as they're going away for the last time. And so that, if you saw that in the newsletter, that's kind of where that came from. So, Dwayne, why don't you go ahead and kick things off there with that?
Sure. Thank you very much, Father, for inviting me to one from the Pews and for everyone to attend tonight. Um, Before I answer that question, I just wanted to say whenever I do speaking engagements or even podcast interviews, I always say, like, one of my speaking coaches said, nobody really cares about what you have to say unless they know that you care, right? So one of the reasons why I said yes to being involved with one from the Pews is that, and one of the reasons I wrote the book is I want especially young people and our generation nowadays to appreciate freedom, as Father was saying, appreciate faith. And what I hope is that the end of our conversation here, what you take back home is to have a greater appreciation for freedom here. Also to have God at the center of our lives. So I think a lot of that is lacking in our society right now, and I hope that you can carry that. So, as far as the story of how my family escaped, I was 14 months old. I was born February 22nd, 1974, and like Father said, about 8 days before the fall of Saigon, which was April 30th, 1975. My father, basically, we prior to my family moving to the South in '54, my parents had my mom was from the North, and my dad was from Central Vietnam. They were kind of on the border. When you look at maps now, it's very hard to find a map back then because everything's changed in name and regions. But they met, and then in '54, they had to move down south. Well, all of us who were born in Vietnam were born in the South. But my dad was a fisherman, and my mom grew up in farming. So when she got married at 17, she had to learn how to handle the fishing industry with the boats that he had. So the fact that he was a fisherman, he was able to use his fishing boat to take my family and several relatives out to sea. And our only option was to know that either we stayed and risked being invaded into our village by the communists and risk death, or take the chance to go out to sea and be saved by merchant ships. That's what my dad did.
Wow, amazing, isn't that something? Um, okay, so was he kind of marked by the communists or your family? Why
Yeah.
would you take that risk? Yeah.
So my oldest brother was about almost 18 at the time, and he was in the seminary. So he studied to become a priest. And my two older brother, my second and third brothers, were also studying with the nuns. They weren't as invested in the seminary compared to my oldest brother. Also, on my dad's side, his youngest sister in his family was married to someone who was high-ranking officer in the South Vietnamese army. On my mom's side, one of my uncles was in the Navy, South Vietnamese Navy. So in terms of involvement in the South Vietnamese fight against communism alongside the Americans, we were very involved. And one of the uncles that was married to my dad's sister, he had tried to escape Vietnam several times and was always caught and sent back. And he eventually passed away within the last 10 years since I moved here. Several of his kids were able to come here through sponsorships and marriage, but other than that, most of them were still in Vietnam. And my uncle, who was in the South Vietnamese Navy, he passed away in 2012. Was never married. He was actually an orphan after the war, and he had a half sister. But he's because he was never married, had children. He actually, when he passed away, became known for his generosity and has left a legacy that's helped me with my nonprofit work. So I wanted to mention that.
Okay, all right. So talk about your faith. I mean, you were only 2 at the time, but your family's faith. You're getting on that boat, literally just hoping that somebody that you can trust will take you guys to a place that's safe. I mean, you're just literally fleeing with almost no possessions, a little water, some provisions, but you had to have such great faith at that point.
Yeah, when I was writing my book, I actually interviewed my oldest brother because he knew a lot of what was going on, and he basically said that in Vietnam, Mother Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mary, was, regardless of whether you're Catholic or not, even Buddhists would talk about Marian apparitions in different parts of Vietnam, like Our Lady of Lavang is one of the apparitions. And so my mom and dad and my whole family would talk about praying the rosary, and that's what they did during the journey. So certainly that, I'm sure there were other saints because when we finally made it to the U.S., lots of people would, credit prayers to Mother Mary and also certain saints, and so they would have blessed statues in the home on their altar in addition to Jesus and praying to God.
Talk about how, so you guys were taken to a larger boat, I believe, right? And then talk about that experience and then how that led you to Guam and then ultimately the United States.
So when my dad first took us on the fishing boat, we escaped from one village called Vinh Tui and then went to another area called Vũng Tàu for those who are veterans in Vietnam. So we only lasted a few days there before the communists also invaded that village, and there was robberies and rape and murder. So that's when we're like, let's get back on the boat and go out to sea again. And so that was the final escape from Vietnam. But because of my dad's small fishing boat, eventually we risked that we would drown and capsize. So there was a flat that already had 5,000 people there that we were able to transfer over to the flat, but we had to leave all our belongings there, which was just noodles and water. And so we got on the flat, and it was basically just standing room only, and to see, infants, that my brother said infants were crushed to death, people fell off the flat into the ocean, just trying to stay on the flat. And from the flat, eventually, we were rescued. We were the last one to leave the flat because everybody wanted to be rescued by humanitarian merchant ships. And, people were just digging through trash to even find things to eat. And even my oldest brother was hallucinating so much that he even drank fish sauce because he was so thirsty, he was thinking that was water. But eventually, we made it on the merchant ship, but I nearly died that first time because my parents said that they were trying to transfer me, and it was just like basically transferring a child to an adult to get onto the merchant ship. And when they were transferring me, that person who was supposed to catch me almost missed. And just by catching me by the leg, and that's what was the difference between me going to the ocean versus making it on the ship. That was the first time, and then eventually from there, the merchant ship took us to the Philippines, and we were processed there, and we were sponsored by a family in Guam, and we were in Guam around May 8th of 1975. So I learned through writing my book that, because when I was wondering, like, well, how did we get picked, because some of our relatives and people that I knew later on, like, some went to Guam, some people ended in Germany or France or Canada, or Australia. And so there was something called Operation New Life, which when I was writing my book, I actually emailed the United States government historian and tried to figure out if I could get my medical records that I had surgery in Guam, emergency surgery there. Because I had some kind of head and neck infection that didn't respond to antibiotics, and so they had to put me under anesthesia and had surgery there through the Army doctors and nurses. But because I was a refugee and my parents weren't in the military, they have no records. They just said that you're just be lucky that you had surgery and survived. But my parents were told in Guam at that time that they weren't sure if I would survive because of the conditions and the type of surgery that I was having. Um, so they were told by the doctors and nurses that to look for a burial site. So I did. But I made it. That was the second time.
You're making us cry already.
It's hard to talk about it.
Yes. Well, talk about, you had a family sponsor you in Guam. How did you end up in the United States?
So from Guam, we were there, like I said, May of 1975. My youngest sister was born July of 1976, and my youngest brother was born in Louisiana, March of 1978. So when I asked my oldest brother, he said many people who wanted to go leave Guam was because of hurricanes. So we experienced like 2 or 3 hurricanes, and we found work, and so my family and my siblings worked to earn enough money to be able to get flights for all of us to be able to fly to New Orleans. But we were sponsored through Catholic Charities and relocated to a small village in Louisiana called Versailles, about an hour outside of New Orleans. It's a huge Catholic community there, and there was Bishop Dominic Lung, who passed away, but he was a priest there, and he helped establish the Vietnamese Catholic community there. And he eventually relocated to California as well, and that was when he was bishop in California, in Orange County for a short time.
Okay. Now you, even though you left Vietnam at the age of 2, you are fluent in Vietnamese,
Yes.
right? So that's very much a part of remembering the culture that you left behind is important for you and your parents. Is that something the parents kind of instilled in all you kids?
Yes, and in fact, I dedicate a chapter in my book called Sowing the Seeds of Faith and Culture. Um, and it was definitely something very important. I remember growing up, even though I would go to like we call like American school, and then in the evening we would go to catechism classes, and that's where we learned our Vietnamese, learned about praise in Vietnamese and how to read and write in Vietnamese. When we got home, my parents would have Vietnamese music, and they would always order Vietnamese Catholic magazines that we would read, and they wanted us to read to them. And my dad and mom, whenever they wanted to write letters home to their siblings, they would, rather than them writing it, they would ask myself or my sisters, and they would dictate the letters, and we would write the letters. And so that's how we got very fluent and kept the language and picked up vocabulary that otherwise we wouldn't know. Also, they made every effort, like I would say through elementary, junior high, and high school. We were involved in youth group at church, so we kept our language that way. And then I also was sent, like probably up till 3rd or 4th grade, to Vietnamese language school in the summer to brush up on things. So definitely, we also, like my parents and my sisters, I just remember, we would joke about it now, but every time we were home, they would want us to speak only Vietnamese, even to each other. And so we would be scolded if like, say that in Vietnamese, so everybody could understand. So that was something we did. And I still converse with my siblings, especially my older siblings, in mainly Vietnamese. And that's sometimes we would speak mostly English, and then there's a Vietnamese word in there. And my husband, who's Filipino, would be like, I caught that.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned in your book you still had some leftover effects from the experience of coming to the United States. You talk in the book about not wanting to take a nap or take off a jacket. So talk a little more about that. Is that something that kind of stayed with you?
Yeah, it's funny. So when I was growing up, my mom and dad, especially my mom and my older siblings, like they never looked at that as something like an explanation for it. They just thought I was different. Like, why can't you just be like your older sister or younger sister to go to school? So to this day, we joke about it because, for example, if they had to take me to the bus with my sister, and in order to not be late, they would take me out half an hour early because they said I would cry and I would roll on the grass and all this stuff, and it would take half an hour for me to get up, and then they would take my sister there. It's like, oh, sure, bye. And it was, they couldn't understand. And my older sisters were like, they thought, you don't like school or what's going on? And I would go to school and it was nap time and the teachers would always have to call home and tell my mom that I'm refusing to take a nap and all the kids are napping and I'm just sitting there refusing to nap. And so my mom would get on the phone and tell me that I just needed to lay down and take a nap, it would be fine. And after that, I'm fine. And the other thing was my mom would send me with like a jacket. And then they was like, oh, you gotta take the jacket off and hang it just like all the other kids. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. So they have to call my mom to tell. So it was always like difficult. I was like the difficult child, and that's all they attributed for. They never had like an explanation. But as I take care of patients and study child psychology and kind of separation anxiety. I mean, in terms of trauma, I think like most people, most scientists say like under 2 or 3, we don't remember that. But I always felt that I had more separation anxiety as a child compared to my siblings. I don't know if it's related to if anything I would like experience, but that certainly would be what was going on.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know that my parents would agree, but
All right, so now looking at it sort of chronologically, so you get two-ish, you're coming to Louisiana, planting there, and then you guys make the break to move the whole family to California. You're about 6 years old. Why the move?
so my oldest brother was actually sponsored by the Diocese of San Jose, and he went to St. Patrick's Seminary in San Jose, Menlo Park. So when we left Guam, he still had the goal of studying to become a priest. And so that was the sponsorship. And then, so he studied in California, Northern California. And he would come visit and he would always tell us about all the great opportunities in California, especially like public education, universities, and people he connected with. He also thought the weather was better. And my dad, as a fisherman, said, if we go there, I want to live where we're near the ocean. So he saw that like an opportunity for us to assimilate with American culture was a lot better than to be just comfortable in just a small village, in the Vietnamese Catholic community. Although it was good for our faith, assimilation was more challenging. So he convinced us to all buy tickets on an Amtrak train and do the long, because there was no way with 10 kids to get plane tickets all across. So that was like 1980 or so. Yeah. So we have pictures from all that. Like, after my parents passed away, we were like going through albums and trying to find those pictures. Yeah. So we would sit around and tell stories about that.
Now, you talk about your faith in there. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, in terms of learning, like the catechism and Vietnamese, but you guys are involved like in the Legion of Mary. Anything else in California about the faith?
Yeah, definitely. So 1980, when we moved, we lived in Garden Grove, and we went to St. Barbara Church. So that's where we were involved with the Eucharistic Youth Group. So like lots of, we'd meet like weekly at church and lots of like Bible study and we went, we'd do like camping trips and just just like youth group activities. And then from there, we eventually moved to the city of Orange in 1983 and part of La Purísima Catholic Church, which is where most of my siblings who are in California still attend. So my parents were longtime parishioners there. Their funerals were held there. Lots of weddings were there. My my third oldest brother, who is also a Catholic priest, so I have two brothers who are Catholic priests. My third oldest brother started a Eucharistic youth group at La Purísima Catholic Church. And then several of my siblings sang in the choir at St. Barbara and also La Purísima Catholic Church. One of my priest brothers and a sister, so my fourth, this is the fourth girl in the family. So she actually is a singer, and she has albums. But prior to being part of the Asia Entertainment Company in California, she and my brother produced like 5 Vietnamese gospel albums and used it to raise money for orphanages in Vietnam and also other charity. But I think my parents basically wanted us, they felt that keeping faith and being involved in faith and giving back to using our time and our talent was one way to keep us structured and also to keep us involved and keeping our faith alive and just instilling a sense of generosity because of the blessings we've been given. You know, people who sponsored us and helped us in our journey, they always reminded us about maybe we can't give back to the people who helped us, but we can help other people who started like us, and that was how we got involved.
Wow, very, very beautiful. So talk about the seeds of your vocation to medicine, how that started to sprout there in California.
So when I was growing up, I would always like hear stories. My relatives would come visit, relatives I like had never met, but they escaped Vietnam around the same time or soon after. And so they knew about my 2 near-death experiences. And they would always, especially the one in Guam. So I would hear stories from my uncles and aunts and cousins. And they would say, oh, if they met all of my family, and there were so many of us that they couldn't remember all of our names. So whenever my parents would refer to me, they would always say, is that the girl that almost died in Guam? And then I was like, then I would ask, like, what do you mean I almost died in Guam? Like, what happened? So that was an interest for me, how some doctor and nurses saved me in Guam. So that always kind of was with me for a while. I did decide on medicine until my 3rd year in college to commit to it. I always had an interest in science since 7th or 8th grade. So I had an immersion experience where I was part of an extra program in junior high where we got to meet college professors on Saturdays who would come and teach and do experiments, and so we had interest in science that way. But when I was about 14 years old, right after 8th grade, in the summer, I got to do like summer internship, paid internships, which back then, like, what is it? The minimum wage was like $3.35, and then after a summer, I got to $4.25. I was so excited. But I got to work at the fire department in Orange County, and then I ended up working there 3 summers in a row. So I met a lady. She was in her 40s, and she was my boss. Her name is Lucille Mello, who I talk about in my book. She's like 80 right now, and I visit her in California. She has Parkinson's disease, but to this day we still keep in touch. And so she basically took me under her wing, and she realized that with a big family, when I worked, I didn't always have a ride home on time, so she would give me rides home if my sister was late or was late at work. And her husband was like an art dealer for museums, so very, very well off. And so anytime I would ride in her car, I'm like, wow, it's a Jaguar, or here's a, like today she's driving a Lexus, or, and so I would always be like, one day. And so she would joke with me that one day you're going to be a scientist that has a driver. And she said, you one day you won't ever drive, but you have a driver. So when I got my driver's license, I told her that I drive now. But she took me through like the 911 operator area and would introduce me to people and have me sit there and kind of listen to how phone calls would come in. And so even I work in the records department, she would take time to allow me to see the other places. She also put trust in me. Like, I look back and I'm like, how at 14, like if they had like a lunch, a retirement lunch, and everybody wanted to go, so she would send me to the switchboard for the fire department and teach me like the day before how to work the switchboard. And she goes, the worst case, it's like a real emergency, just tell them to call 911, we'll take care of it. I never had to do that, but I learned kind of the phone calls that would come in and, just handling those things. And also taking care of people coming in if they had a fire, how to handle pulling paperwork for that. But I got to read like reports, medical incident reports, fire incident reports. So it's like it created a curiosity for me, and being able to see what it was like to meet like first responders and the kind of work they do. So it was always fascinating for me at that point. Um, from there, I volunteered in college. I volunteered in the summer at a pharmacy at St. Joseph's Hospital in Orange County. And then I volunteered in the neonatal ICU for 2.5 years, 6 months in the emergency room. I worked with a pathologist, an MD, PhD pathologist at UC Irvine, and so I got to kind of ask him a little bit about what it was like, in medicine. So between that and volunteering, I had a commitment to medicine.
Okay, all right, very good. And so it's great that, everyone should have a mentor, and so it's so great to have someone that can help inspire you and answer your questions. Now, you get into med school in the Caribbean. Now, most people think the Caribbean, oh, wow, this is Club Med, Must have been easy. You're in the Caribbean, what could go wrong. But you talk about in the book, you said it was the most desolate time of your life. So talk about that.
So when I talk about that, I think back to how I was feeling. A couple of things. Kind of my decision to go away for medicine was something that was kind of a challenge in my family, especially growing up in Asian culture. Even for my parents and my siblings, it wasn't something normal for women to pursue higher education. So college was considered high education, and it was like get a job, get married, and have children. So one of my sisters had already gone away for dental school, and she had kind of gone through having to convince my parents that she knew what she was doing and trust, that she can pursue that. So I felt kind of alone in the decision of I'm going to go and pursue medicine. So it wasn't until probably when I was going through my first year where they really saw like I was committed and this is really it. And I had gone through like 2 hurricanes, in the first year of med school, and a third one in the second year, category 3, 4, and 5, and like about half of my class left after the first 2 hurricanes. So there was a lot of challenges, but certainly the other thing was in terms of desolation, growing up with 9 siblings and always coming home to prayer together, waking up prayer together, eating together, cooking together, having church together. So those were things I had to get used to. My first roommate in med school was Buddhist, and then after like the first year, I had 2 roommates. One was Catholic, somewhat practicing, not I wouldn't say devout, but God reconnected me with her after 13 years, and I just saw her in California at the end of May. So I can talk about that too. But my other roommate was Muslim. So the interesting thing was, it's like you go out, you grew up like completely Catholic, cradle Catholic, brothers or priests, and then you like, oh, well, I have to kind of accept differences, right? So I remember my roommate who was Muslim would come into I stayed in the studio part, and then the other two roommates shared a one bedroom. And she came out to my studio in the after evening and said, "Do you mind if I pray here?" And she had her prayer mat because it was facing the right direction, and she was actually facing Jesus Christ. And I said, "Absolutely, you can face there, and you can pray as much as you want." And so it was, and then she turned out to be later on became my maid of honor at, in, in the wedding. So, I learned that. And then my other roommate my first roommate who was Buddhist, like my brothers came to bring me to med school, and she got to meet them, and she had a curiosity, right? So you kind of plant that seed of like, this is what we do, and this is my area where I have my altar and I pray. So she has that curiosity. And then my roommate who was Korean Catholic, but she was struggling with following everything, in terms of the Catholic teaching. So we would have conversations about it, and we ended up going to church together. And I had a car and drove her, and so, and then during hurricanes we would pray, a lot over it. So I think it's like sometimes you don't have to preach, but it's just through encouragement and doing what you do, and having a respect for what people do and understanding it. I think that's what helped me grow a lot. So I found through the desolation, I said, well, now I just have to create kind of my own structure, my own schedule, and still incorporate the things I learned in my faith to my daily routine and not abandon it, because I felt if I did, I just didn't have direction. So yeah.
Very good. Okay. Now, in 2002, you began your residency in internal medicine and pediatrics at the University of Missouri in Columbia. Now, it was at that time you shared in your book a very scary time in your life with an ex-boyfriend. So can you talk about that difficult time?
Yes. It's funny, like, there's several people that have read my book, and they would come up to me and say, I couldn't be that vulnerable, to share stories. But I think when I wrote that story and other stories, I felt like if you can't be vulnerable, then what's the point of writing? And people won't be able to relate. And sometimes those stories can touch a life in a different way because they feel like they can relate and you can relate to them. But prior to going to med school, I dated somebody for 7 years who was Vietnamese and Catholic. And again, not super practicing, but again, we take him to church, so then we start practicing. Then I later find out he got married to a very devout Catholic. So, um, but when I moved away, and we had just different goals. He wanted to get married, and I just felt like I still didn't really know where my career was going. It wasn't fair to like take him everywhere. So that was fine, amicable. We left it there, and then maybe a year later, so there was a student and maybe a semester or two under me. So we got to know each other, but most of our relationship was long distance because he ended up doing rotations in England for a year, and then I was in all over the East Coast, different hospitals. But before I started residency, I felt like I wanted to focus on just doing residency. And I remember, in terms of our relationship, it was like, again, he wanted to get married, and he was kind of like having his parents involved and really pushing the issue. And I just felt like very suffocated, meaning that I didn't really have a voice in a lot of the things that was going on. So I repeatedly wanted to just end it, and it was difficult. And finally I said, it has to just end because I'm moving to Missouri and I have to get started in residency. And I thought everything was fine. And I think probably that was like May or June of '02. And this is now spring of '03. And prior to that, I was getting all these stalking phone calls and like impersonating, a police officer, threatening different things. And I felt very unsafe. And I had just bought a house, living by myself. Um, and luckily I knew my neighbors. And I talked to several doctors at the hospital about what was going on. So then they told me I needed to file like a police report and get a protection order in case anything happened, because they said like they've seen patterns like this with domestic violence. And so I did. And then one day I was home mowing my yard, and somebody pulled up in front of my house, and I thought that was odd. Nobody parks like just right there. And then I didn't close the garage. I just closed the door, went to the back, and all of a sudden I saw somebody was trying to get to my back door. So I picked up the phone and I just called down 911, trying to get somebody to come help me. And so before the person broke in, a police officer showed up in my front door. And I had a protection order that was right there that was my ex-boyfriend. That was that got was able to get my new address, and drove all the way from Virginia to Missouri to do this. But it was a felony that he was charged with, and in order for me, I had to go to court and try to get an extension. It was only like 30 days, so I had to get a 1-year extension, so I had to do that. But he didn't show up, and so it was an automatic extension. So I went through that. Luckily, the hospital and the doctors were so supportive, because many women had gone through something similar in the past. Even the chief resident went to court with me to make sure I was okay. But then the other thing that was interesting is even after that, I had protection order, and then one day I was working and I got paged by security at the hospital, and they said that somebody at the information desk wants to see me, and I asked for the name. It was him and his mom. They had come for some reason. I said like, I can't be there because I have a protection order, and this person shouldn't even be in the hospital. So that was the last thing. And so then the prosecutor later on asked me if I wanted to pursue, charges and all that, and I said, well, they said I could drop it to a misdemeanor so that it wouldn't affect his future medical career. So I talked to my priest brothers and everybody, and he's like, just drop it to a misdemeanor, and just like, your point is that you're just trying to protect yourself, not to ruin somebody's career. But I don't know whatever happened, whether he went to medicine or not. But one of the things I told my husband, that we watched this movie called, I think it was called The Craigslist Killer or something.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it was a medical student that was at Boston University, and he eventually killed himself in prison. But he basically hid a lot of things, that he was, having a second life and gambling and murdering girls while he was engaged to be married to this girl.
Wow.
But like, I remember watching that, and I thought, people say just because you're in healthcare, a professional, or pursuing a professional degree, doesn't mean you can't commit domestic violence. And so what happened from there is I ended up working, over the last 10 years with many nurses who are single moms who have been in domestic violence situations, and I've been able to help them because I've been through what I've been through to protect them from being harmed and getting protection orders and that kind of thing. So I always say there's always a reason something happens, because God's supposed to use you in the future.
Yeah, well, that's great, and I think we all appreciate how vulnerable you were in putting that in the book and being willing to talk about it. Now, out of the ashes of that relationship in Missouri, you met Mark. It's around here somewhere. Okay, there he is in the back now. Yes. Okay. Yes. So, kind of talk about how God brought you two together.
So there's like a funny side to. I told him like you might be embarrassed, so of course he goes back there. So let's see. We both started residency in July of 2002. So the first time, the funny thing is we both had to do like CPR, training classes before we started residency. And so he sits like behind me. This is what I didn't know. He was doing surgery. He was doing a surgery like year there, and I was doing internal medicine and pediatrics. And we had to do this called like a pre-test. You have to do a pre-test before you take the course. So at the end of the course, in a few days, you can easily pass the test. And I guess his program didn't give him a book, and they didn't give him a pre-test. So he sees me, and he's like this. And I was turned back, and he goes, "Where did you get the pre-test? Where did you get the book?" And I said, "My program gave it to me." And he's like, "They didn't give me anything." So I let him borrow my book, and then so then eventually, we got through that. So that I didn't know anything about, didn't talk to him or anything. And a few months later, I was on pediatric rotation because with internal medicine pediatrics, every 3 months we switched to the other department. Um, but it so happened that when I was on pediatric on the floor, he was working on EMT rotation in surgery. And then I had to call consults for my patients, and he was on call. So he took care of my patients, like them coming to consults. And so one day, it was like a Friday, and I was on call. And so he pages me in the afternoon, and he says, "I just want to call and let you know that you can discharge your patients." And I said, "I've already sent them home." and then, then he's like, I didn't know at the time, but he's like, "So what are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, "I'll be post call." And he goes, I said, "I'm going to call him back, be post call." He goes, "Well, can I get your number in case you aren't doing anything? Maybe we can go to dinner." And I said, "You already have my pager, so you don't need my number." So that's like another time, but like I had no idea. I was very focused, and with everything that I'd been through, I just was not interested in getting involved with anybody. And then I guess like he said later that over the holidays, like he was talking to friends who knew me, wondering like what I was doing for the holidays. So months later, I was working at the VA hospital, the Harry S. Truman Hospital, and we were on call on the same night at the VA. And he's walking around, comes over and he sees that I'm on call. And he comes over and he asks me, "Can you help me put in a heparin order in the computer?" I'm like, "Sure, I can help you." So I did. And I didn't take anything of it. And then eventually he asked me out, and we eventually went out on our first date. And I looked back, and it was like my dad's birthday. And yeah, so we went out on my dad's birthday. And a year later, he sends me like a framed picture of us, and he put, the date of my dad's birthday. And that's when I realized that we went out on my dad's birthday. So there's lots of connections to my dad from that point on. Yeah.
Okay, well, talk about just the week of your wedding. You packed a lot in, just both personally and professionally. What happened that week?
And so the last, it was June of 2006. Since I did 2 residencies, I had a graduation for internal medicine on a Tuesday, and on that Friday was my pediatric graduation, and on Saturday was my wedding. So, oh gosh, I was trying to get all of my family to come to the wedding, and I said, "If you come early, you could go to one of the graduations." And his family was from from Florida, Georgia, and mine was from California. So they're meeting in the middle, and lots of challenges. Like I was the first one in my family to get married, who not in my hometown, so that was challenging. My parents and my siblings weren't initially happy about that, but in terms of the amount of time that I had, between residency and fellowship, we decided on that. Plus the convenience of families coming together. But yeah, we had to pack all that in, and I had 2 weeks between graduating, getting married, and starting a fellowship. So we had to put my house up for sale, which took, 3 months to sell. And then we moved to New York and had to find an apartment. We had to do all of that. So I went from a 1,600 square foot 3-bedroom home to car garage for like 1,000 mortgage to Probably about more than that, probably 1,500 for like a 500 square foot, apartment in New York with no parking. And, that's like the one place that I had the most parking tickets was in New York City. Well, never a moving violation. It was always, I come home and my husband would ask me how today, I'm like, another parking ticket. But that was, yeah, it was challenging and it was difficult. My husband grew up in New York and Albany, and his dad was, worked at the VA there. But he had a lot of relatives in New York and New Jersey area, so it was going to the fellowship there was an opportunity that came about.
Okay, good. So yeah, you had fellowship there, of course, in New York, and it was there that Mark entered the Catholic Church. So once you kind of know he's Filipino, we assume maybe he's born Catholic, but not. So talk about the discussions you guys had that led him into the faith.
So the funny thing is, like he always says, 99% of Filipinos are Catholic, and you met them, not 1%. Actually, it's 0.1%. Of the Filipinos Episcopalian. So just like I don't know, like my parents say I was different. That must be continued into adulthood. But yeah, so when we got married in June of '06, and he was confirmed into the Catholic Church in Easter of 2007. And our conversation was basically, talking about having a common faith, and he went to church, but it was having common faith and communion and planning family, all those things, just to have something in common before we talked about, furthering our marriage and our family. So I ended up trying to go to as much of his, back then called RCIA classes with him. Part of it was I also wanted to learn like questions that being a creative Catholic, things that I practiced but didn't understand, or the questions of why. But there were still questions that he would ask, and then I don't know, you asked the nun about that. I said, I want to know too. So it was nice for me to be able to go to the classes with him and then meet other people that were confirmed as well. So like a nice renewal of understanding of my faith along that journey. Yeah.
Okay.
And his mom actually, so Mark's mom was raised Catholic, and a lot of his cousins were Catholic, but dad was Episcopalian, and so it's like we converted on the opposite direction. But they were completely fine because they knew how important my faith was, and they knew my brothers and my family.
Sure, okay, all right. Now, professionally, you did a stint in Georgia, so maybe describe that a little bit, and then that led you to Rockford.
So when I finished my fellowship in June of 2009, there was only like a handful of jobs out there that gave me an opportunity to do what's called the physician scientist track. So you take care of patients, but you can also pursue a science project in the lab. And so Georgia was one of them. And I was there from August of '09 until May 2013. And it was great because I got to work with three pediatric surgeons there who were wonderful. And I also was offered a job to stay in New York, but I felt like I wanted to kind of, spread my wings and be independent, right? To not rely on my mentors still, and just grow in kind of my own way of practicing medicine. So I loved it there, and being able to also serve military families from South Carolina as well who came over. Many patients there who would drive 4 hours to see us because it was very limited number of pediatric GI physicians. So it was wonderful. But I decided that the scientist track, after a while, like I applied for NIH grants, and at one point they wanted me to reapply and create animal models and research, and I didn't want to do animal research. So I left that and started to look for clinical jobs, and that's what landed me here in Rockford. But it took me, like, I came here and did like what we call locum tenens work, which is where I did a week of coverage in June, July, and August of 2012 for Rockford Memorial Hospital. And just to kind of see if I'm a good fit, or do I like the system or the people, or is it really as great as what the interview says? And it took me still almost a year to decide to move because I loved the surgeons there and I really liked the freestanding children's hospital there. But I felt like clinically it was time because lots of the leadership within my department, it was kind of falling apart. And I felt like the opportunity here to come and join several other partners was a good thing. So that's why I came. But it was also a place where the seed for my nonprofit started, even though the nonprofit didn't start there.
Yes. Okay, we'll talk about that. You formed Faithful to Fitness. So talk about how God kind of brought you to that.
So when I was in Georgia, I had a medical resident, pediatric resident, who was interested in pediatric GI, and he's a PGI in Atlanta now. But he wanted to do research with me, or write a grant, do something, and I had the idea of doing a community-based childhood obesity intervention program in Augusta. One of the things that he and I discovered is that the childhood obesity in the literature, there's lots of people who study childhood obesity, but there's not a lot of people who actually do intervention. So we even had an organization there called the Georgia Prevention Institute. And so when I went to visit them, I asked, so what are you doing in terms of prevention? Because that's the name. And they said, well, we just have kids come here, just play basketball. And then we measure their blood pressure and cholesterol, this and that. I said, well, kind of study them, not really doing prevention, right? So I asked them, can you do something for kids who are struggling to lose weight and have fatty liver disease and diabetes? And it was like they didn't really have anything to answer the question I had. So that's when I decided, when I talked to several partners there, they had the idea of doing a obesity clinic, but there were struggles to get insurance to cover obesity like treatment in terms of a just by itself. Not you had to have like diabetes or high blood pressure or something, fatty liver disease to get coverage at that time. So those are challenges there. So I said, if you really want to do an intervention, why do you worry about it being a clinic, right? Why not work with community partners? So that's when I created the kind of a blueprint of how to do that. And around that time, just down the street from the hospital, there's a Croc Center, and they donated a fitness instructor and space on the Saturday. I got dietetic interns and medical students, residents, doctors. So we just came and worked out together, and whatever we tell our patients to go out and be an example. So that's what we did. And then I also organized a 5K event there in January of 2013. And we called it Fight Obesity, Walk With Me, which became the name that I chose for our 5K here as well. But we had over probably 120 people that came out in Georgia for that first event, and even the sheriff of the county came out. And we had kids in our program that were interviewed by Augusta Magazine because they not only lost weight during our program, but continued for 9 months, and many of their health problems like, sleep apnea and asthma and medicine, things they were on like for reflux or constipation, because if they changed their diet and exercise, they were able to get off medications and improve their chronic health conditions. So I applied for a grant through the American Academy of Pediatrics called the CATCH grant, and that we were given about $3,000, but whatever we budgeted, most of it was covered by the community efforts, and so we returned most of that money at the end of 6 months. So what it inspired me was that would not cost millions of dollars if you wanted to make a difference in childhood obesity, if you got community partners who would donate their time, talent, and treasure and just be passionate. And it's about volunteerism, which is what our church teaches, right? It's stewardship of time, talent, and treasure. So I applied those concepts into Madison, and that's how that first program started. Yeah. Okay. And then when I came here, I was actually talking to my brothers. I said, I really want to do what I did in Georgia, but I feel like it's something that can be replicated across any city, which is the reason why we got the grant from the American Academy of Pediatrics in the first place. It had to be something that can be replicated, not specific to a clinic or a hospital or city. And that inspired me to say, if I can replicate it, I can start a nonprofit. And so this is like in the spring of 2014, I had gone through Light of the World retreat, which we'll talk about. And it led me to spend more time in silent adoration. And I was sitting there, just wondering, like, if I had a nonprofit, what would I call it? And all of a sudden, like, I just heard, whatever you do, make sure there's a word faith in there. And I just wrote it down. And then I thought, well, what else would sound right with faith? And I thought, fitness. And then I thought, well, fitness involves, at least two components, right? This is where the number two came in. I thought patient, doctor, community, with the family, in terms of diet and exercise, mental health, spiritual health, or physical health. So there's like a very important part of why the two is there. But the inspiration for the name came from sitting in adoration. I just needed that, like sometimes you pray and you talk, but you just sit and listen and hear that voice. And that was where the name came from. And I still have those scrap papers, like where I was writing down symbols and trying to get something trademarked.
Well, we'll give you a chance to maybe do a little commercial. So you've got a 5K/walk coming up on, is it the 25th of August?
24th, yeah.
24th early bird special is, when is that? It's like this Friday or Saturday?
Yes. Yeah, so this August 24th at 9 a.m. At Peak Sports Club in Loves Park this is our 9th year for the 5K Fight Obesity Walk with me. So it's not a run, it's a walk. You can run if you want. You can bring your family, dogs, strollers, and the mayor of Loves Park will be there to speak as well. It's only $12 per person, and if you sign up by tomorrow midnight, you'll get a T-shirt. And the T-shirts every year is different, but this year it's red. And my sister in Boston, she's on the board for our nonprofit, and she chose the color red. And after we picked it, and I thought, how significant it is. It's the National Eucharistic Congress, and the color red. And we'll see if we get a red wave or not this year.
Yeah. Now talk about, I just got two questions left here. You have a chapter in the book on Light of the World, so obviously that was a big part of your life. Tell us about your experience there. And of course, as any newcomer may not know, Light of the World started right here at this parish.
So in the spring of 2014, I was leading Mass one day and I saw a sign for Light of the World retreat. And I thought, like, I remember growing up hearing about, I would go to kind of mission, a Lenten mission or Advent mission, and I thought that was the extent of what I knew as retreats for Catholic. But I just thought, wow, what a novel idea, a retreat for Catholics. And so I looked at it and I decided that I'm going to sign up. And then, my husband tells me later, oh, the CPA wants to meet us for taxes that same weekend. And I said, well, the CPA is just going to have to wait. So I came out, I gave an hour for her, in the break, and then took care of it and still didn't miss the retreat. But one of the things that I found out how significant that retreat was, number one is I thought, that's when I looked at that the post of the message. I thought, is this why God brought me to Rockford? I need to go to the retreat because I need something different than what I've been through, throughout my career. So that was something that spoke to me. And then when I went there, I also met Dr. Ed Santos, who introduced me to the Catholic Medical Association and Dr. Baptist. So I've been a member of the Catholic Medical Association since 2014 and went to the first national meeting in 2019, and I've been thankfully involved with Dr. Baptist here at Holy Family. So tonight I wanted to represent the Catholic Medical Association.
Maybe you could stand up and show them, so that's your little lab coat that says Catholic.
So I told my husband, I said throughout my career I've had many lab coats in the lab and also in the hospital, in different hospitals. But since September 2020, everywhere that I've gone, whether I work or I do a speaking event or a podcast or I do media, I always wear this. Um, Actually, on secular, media too. I was just on 23 News Morning Blend on Tuesday, and I've been on there 3 times to promote my 5K in the past few years. And I always take advantage of that to just wear this. And I said, they didn't tell me I couldn't. And I remember just listening to, different, clergy and different Catholic speakers on YouTube. And they always say, find a way to take up space for your faith. So go out there and take up space, whether it's a yard sign or whether it's you. Like I would go through my neighborhood, my husband knows this, like after dinner, if we've had dinner, I'll take a walk and I'll bring my rosary. I would pray the rosary. And whether they're curious or not, it doesn't matter, right? But sometimes people are curious and it creates a conversation. After Light of the World, like I had the Light of the World cross that we were given, and I would wear that as part of my badge at work. And then when I went on locum tenens work, I would have my lanyard, and it would say Catholic Medical Association. And I put that also, on my CV, whenever they say you're part of any organization, and not only did I put the North American Society of PGI, but I put Catholic Medical Association, my Catholic doctor. Because, unlike society right now, whether in leadership or anywhere, there's very little authenticity, right? People like to say, oh, I'm speaking to this group, let me be this way, and I'm not going to tell them I'm Catholic or Christian. It doesn't matter. I show up on podcasts, and I said, there's a reason why you invited me here, and you can't tell me I can't talk about that, right? There's arguments on social media, or even like a website, a place like LinkedIn. There was even an argument this morning, oh, the Bible does not belong on LinkedIn. And I said, well, how about if it's my Catholic doctor? We're on LinkedIn. We can't talk about God and the Bible. And so, I said, like, there's people, their opinions will not change, but that's not your job. Your job is to state what you believe, and you should have freedom to do that. So,
that's great. That's great to hear that. Now, you've always had kind of a passion for the underdog. That's led you to help out with St. Vincent de Paul Society. Any stories you wanted to share about your involvement there?
Yes, and I see many Vincentians here, so thank you for coming. So I've been involved since the beginning. I believe it was December 2016 when we were formed here. Um, I'm on the fundraising team, so I don't do home visits, but one of the things I have found is sometimes you identify what what you can give without being overwhelmed. And so I knew that I didn't have the time to be able to do home visits like others who are doing a wonderful job of that. But I think being able to come monthly, what I look forward to is always spiritual reflection and being able to pray with all of my members of St. Vincent de Paul. The other thing too is when I work in healthcare and being a professional and making lots of money and all that, sometimes if you stay close to the underdog, you're reminded of where you started. And also remind, not just if you make money, like people say, oh, it's not that money is evil, but when you love money, it becomes evil. So it's always good to be reminded, yes, God can bless you with your financial blessings, but find ways to give back. And St. Vincent de Paul has reminded me of that, and reminded me to think of ways to help. I've also been able to involve people in the community to give to our friends in need, even though they're not Catholic, Christian, or part of St. Vincent de Paul. So sometimes within our group, members will say, we're visiting someone who has a need for, things in the kitchen or crib or just some basic necessities because they just, left a domestic violence situation and they have their own place, but they have nothing. And so, like I have a lot of connections within the social media world, and I know people in healthcare and people who can give, maybe not money, but things that they no longer need, but our friends in need do need it. I'll post something out there, and basically within a half an hour, somebody will say, "We have this. How can?" Then my husband has a truck, so I get him involved, and then help with deliveries. So I think the blessing, and we had this reflection yesterday in our meeting about how to be the bread of life for others, because Jesus is the bread of life for us. So those are different ways that not only we can do that, but we can invite others who may not be of the common faith, but still instill like a generosity spirit and help to build their character and build virtue for them as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, I've got one last question, but I'll mention that, you don't know this, but I'll be announcing, probably in October, we're gonna do a pilgrimage. Now, this is January of 2026, so, a ways down the way, but we're gonna do Southeast Asia. We're gonna go to Vietnam, to Thailand, Singapore, and Hong Kong. So that'll all be by cruise, on a cruise ship, and then we'll go there, we'll dock at those 4 different places, so more to follow that, but Our Lady of Lavang, we're gonna get to that, so that's a Marriott approved apparition site in Vietnam, so that's gonna be, so anyways, before I go to all of you, one last question, where do you think God's leading you next?
So this is something I've kind of asked myself a lot in the last 4 years. I feel that in the last year or so, so in my Catholic doctor, we talk about healing the sick and proclaiming the kingdom. And I think in the last year, I focused, and I feel God calling me to focus less on making a living through healing the sick and doing more of proclaiming the kingdom. And so in the past 2 years, I've spent a lot of time just building on like I had a social media coach that helped me from the business standpoint to share my faith through video and getting comfortable with that and how to talk and then like kind of identifying like my niche and building an audience. So people will say, "Oh, social media is not good, but you can use it for good." And so she's in Michigan, but she actually is currently she has a business where she coaches Christian women to use their faith and being bold about it and sharing it as being part of their business. She's not Catholic; she's actually a born again Christian. And so that's how we connected. And she has her own podcast, but she and a bunch of other girls created a podcast where it's called Girls Gone Holy. So there's things that I follow, and she gives me. I still follow her on Instagram, and she supports me in terms of messaging, in terms of whenever I have questions. But even though she's not Catholic, her boldness in her being a mom, being a born again Christian, and incorporating that to a business is what has helped me in sharing my Catholic faith, faith based medicine, and also my nonprofit work. And she told me she was coaching me that she felt like I could do series. She goes, "I'm not Catholic, but I really think it would be neat if you talked about the saints." And so I said, "I think that would be neat too, because I need to learn about the saints." And so I ended up doing like series on saints and saints that I didn't even know about, and I didn't realize there were over 10,000 saints. And so then she was right, because once I started giving 1 minute videos about saints of the day, I started building all these followers. I have over 2,000 followers on TikTok. So, but she told me that was one thing, and then also told me, so sometimes when you have a coach, they identify your strengths and things that you should work on to grow your business. So she also said that since I have a nonprofit and I'm doing faith-based care, that lots of it is also charity care, I should talk about my passion for generosity. So I share that, and who wouldn't relate to generosity, and who wouldn't want to hear about joy through generosity, and sharing my book and things like that. So just little tips, having a coach for 3 months, you know, She told me like one day you're gonna go viral, but you know God will decide when that happens. And so I just do what I do, and I am able to repurpose videos from TikTok onto YouTube channel, and so I'm very close to monetizing on YouTube. But again, like it's sometimes like today's event, I will be able to share it onto my YouTube channel, and people will discover that through it as well. So yeah, even Bishop Barron followed me on TikTok.
Wow. Wow, jeez. You're getting
I was
famous
like,
now.
I couldn't believe it. I said, is that the real account?
Wow, that's neat. All right. Okay, this is where Phil Kine becomes Phil Donahue. So if you remember that, caller, are you there? Anyways, I'll run around with the microphone for anyone who has a question. Anybody? Yes, John.
If I can take you back to when you were 2, I didn't understand the flat. So when you were 2 and you got off your dad's boat onto this thing called a flat, what was that? And how many people were there?
I was told by my brother there was about 5,000 people. So it was kind of, he said it was some kind of something that was part of like artillery or weaponry that they used to use to transport, but it was abandoned. And so people used that to travel, is what I understood. It was just standing room only. It wasn't like a ship or anything, but it was covered, yeah.
Very good. Okay. Anybody else?
Did your
Yes.
parents?
Okay, I got one over there. Yes.
You said at home you guys were encouraged to speak Vietnamese. Did your parents ever become fluent in English, or do they just only speak Vietnamese?
They weren't ever fluent in English, but couldn't speak fluently, but they understood enough to get around. But we usually were with them. But they learned, they became U.S. citizens, but they took the Vietnamese test to get into U.S. citizenship. So they actually had to actually listen to tapes on U.S. history. And then so I would walk into the kitchen and I'm like, what, Mom, what are you doing? He's like, I'm learning about these presidents. So.
You are so humble. I just want people to know how generous you are. For our Vincentians one year, you made up duffel bags full of food, drink, some hats, mittens, and things for us to hand out to the homeless or to anybody we visited who needed. You did that all on your own, unasked, but I just want people to recognize what you've done for this city.
Well, thank you. That was with the help with other people too. So like I said, I utilize my connections. So people I've known through my nonprofit. So I've helped them and families or just volunteers and then partnerships. So I would tell them, oh, if you guys are interested, we're doing this thing, it's called Blessing Bags for the Homeless. So we did it for several years. So, I mean, I think there's teaching people to know that there's joy through giving, and it doesn't require to be a millionaire, right? We can all have time and talent, and just being able to give that time and talent is what matters. So thank you for that.
I'm just overwhelmed by everything you've done and everything you've been through. What gives you the energy to continue to do all these things one after another? And is it God that gives you the strength and energy to do all of this and keep growing and keep doing?
Thank you for that question. Absolutely. My oldest sister, she has 5 kids, and she always asks me that question, and she says, "It's got to be God because I have 5 kids, and I don't even know if I could ever do that." But I say, like yesterday, before I went to St. Vincent de Paul's meeting, I was at adoration, and before I came here, I also did that. So before I do any kind of speaking engagements or work or a podcast, radio interview, I always say a rosary, even if I have time for a Divine Mercy Chaplet or a decade, and or in my book I share the prayer for surgeons, physicians and surgeons with Cosmos and Saint Cosmos and Damien. So whatever comes to mind, but I certainly try my best. I was interviewed a couple days ago about Catholic telemedicine, and it was somebody that found me on LinkedIn that was writing a research paper comparing the secular healthcare and faith-based care. And as I was talking to him, I thought, how is this coming out so smoothly? And so I told him, I said that he asked me about how my Catholic doctor does telemedicine marketing to patients and recruiting doctors to our group. And I said, we don't market. I said, the person that markets for us is the Holy Spirit. And I said, why do you think in 4 years, 5 years almost 200 doctors left their hospitals and came to my Catholic doctor without getting a salary and just working and getting paid by patient, like without benefits, because they believe that we're doing the right thing and we're working for God, right? And then the other thing that person asked me, which is a very unusual question, he said, he didn't say it's a question that's specifically to business, personally, professionally. He said, what is most important? That was the only question I said, well, 10 years ago, I would have to qualify that question with, do you mean in my business? Do you mean personally, my family, my church? And he says, no, just generally. And I said, well, actually, I don't have to qualify because God is most important. And then at that point, he felt very comfortable to share with me that he was Catholic and he went to a Catholic high school called Notre Dame. And I said, oh, okay, so I got you comfortable telling me about your faith now. Because it took like half an hour before he told me he was Catholic. Yeah, and I was fine with that, knowing that I could talk because that was the point of his research paper. So, yeah.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you. One last question here, Mary Kay? Yes. Yeah.
So this is a plug for your book because when your book first came out, I had a copy and I read it and just loved it. It happened to be in my purse when I was at a Knights of Columbus event down in Springfield. And at the ladies' luncheon, we started talking about, for some reason, the fall of Vietnam. And I said, oh, I've got the perfect book for you. So I passed it to somebody in Illinois somewhere has a copy of your book.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so once again, you can get a copy of that book in the back if you want to purchase it for $20. And so is Mark going to sell we're going to have him over there, maybe Mark over there, and yes. And I told Katrina that I started a funeral I just did this last Friday on late great Bob Parad, who many of you know. And I took it from a chapter one in her book, and we'll just kind of end with that in prayer. And this is Why Live to Give. Of course, the book is called Live to Give, and the last chapter is entitled Why Live to Give. At the end of our lives, we will not be judged by how many diplomas we have received, how much money we have made, or how many great things we have done. We will be judged by, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was naked and you clothed me. I was homeless and you took me in. St. Teresa of Calcutta. We thank you, Lord, for Dr. Katrina Nguyen, her inspirational story, and the legacy that she leaves already on this earth through other people, and how she has inspired so many others. You have used her so well, and just in the short 50 or so years of her life. And so we just ask you to continue to bless her and touch lives that will then bear fruit in others, just as she was talking about with that doctor. So continue to give her that firmness, that boldness to practice and talk about her faith in medicine. It's so sorely needed in that institution. And remind all of us as well just how blessed we are to live in this country and to live in a place where we do have our cherished freedoms. And for all the silent petitions within the hearts of everyone present here, we lift them up before Our Lady of Lavang as we pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Our Lady of Lavang, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. Thank you all. Good job for